Good evening. Today is Thursday, October 6th, 2022. We will be sitting in room 255 for the Standing Committee on Social and Economic Development at approximately 6 p.m. Thanks and have a good night. Testing, testing.
Is everyone ready to go? Good evening. Will the Standing Committee on Social and Economic Development please come to order? Before the committee can proceed with the business before it, it must elect a chairperson. Are there any nominations? Mr. Howard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I nominate Mr. Teitzman.
Mr. Teitzman has been nominated. Are there any other nominations? Hearing no other nominations, Mr. Teitzman, will you please take the chair?
I will gladly take the chair. Our next item of business is the election of a vice chairperson. Are there any nominations? Mr. Howard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I nominate Mr. Micklefield.
Are there any other nominations? Hearing no other nominations, Mr. Micklefield is elected vice chairperson. This meeting has been called to consider the following bill. Bill number 36, the Manitoba Hydro Amendment and Public Utilities Board Amendment Act. I would like to inform all in attendance of the provisions in our rules regarding the hour of adjournment. A standing committee meeting to consider a bill must not sit past midnight to hear public presentations or to consider clause by clause of a bill, except by unanimous consent of the committee. Prior to proceeding with public presentations, I would like to advise members of the public regarding the process for speaking in a committee. In accordance with our rules, a time limit of 10 minutes has been allotted for presentations, with another total of 5 minutes allowed for questions from committee members. Questions shall not exceed 30 seconds in length, and there's no limit on the answer time limit for answers. Questions may be addressed to presenters in the following rotation. First, the minister sponsoring the bill. Second, a member of the official opposition. And third, an independent member. If a presenter is not in attendance when their name is called, they will be dropped to the bottom of the list. If the presenter is not in attendance when their name is called a second time, they will be removed from the presenter's list. The proceedings of our meetings are recorded in order to provide a verbatim transcript. Each time someone wishes to speak, whether it be an MLA or presenter, I first have to say the person's name. This is the signal for the Hansard recorder to turn the mics on and off. On the topic of determining the order of public presentations, I will note that we do have out-of-town presenters in attendance, marked with an asterisk on the list. With these considerations in mind, then, in what order does the committee wish to hear the presentations? Minister Howard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm wondering if we could have the out-of-town presenters present first, if they're in person.
So the proposal is for out-of-town in-person presenters to present first. Is that agreeable to the committee?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you for your patience. Then we will now proceed with public presentations. Is Lorena Mitchell in person at this time? No. And just looking at our out-of-town guests. Is Gina Enns in person for this evening? And is Mary Louise Chown in person for this evening? And then is Stephanie Groot in person this evening? Okay. And I'll just note, I believe correctly, that me calling out their names does not constitute me calling them to committee. We will get to their names in the regular routine, because I only asked if they were in person, not if they were available virtually. Okay. So I will now call upon, oh, it's right here. Thank you. I have a list. I will now call upon Patricia Fitzpatrick, private citizen. She's attending virtually. And we'll see if we can get you up on the screen. There you are. And you can now, yeah, you can begin with your presentation. Go ahead, you have 10 minutes.
Great, thank you very much. Good evening, my name is Dr. Patricia Fitzpatrick. I'm a professor in the Department of Geography and an instructor in the Masters of Development Practice program at the University of Winnipeg. Tonight, I'm speaking with you from Treaty 1. I'm privileged to live in the territory of Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji Cree, Dakota, and Dene people, and the homeland of the Métis people. The water we drink comes from Treaty 3 and beyond, and the power we use comes from Treaty 5 and beyond. I would like to thank the members of the Steering Committee on Social and Economic Development for the opportunity to share my concerns about Bill 36. To start with, a little bit about me. My research focuses on how we manage our natural resources. My studies concern elements such as public participation, unpacking procedural complexity, strengthening follow-up, monitoring, and adaptive management, and governance. I entered this field through environmental impact assessment. Over the last 27 years, I've been involved in 14 different assessments related to mining, hydroelectricity, and oil and gas. And as you may have surmised, I've been involved in all of the major energy-related environmental hearings in Manitoba since 2004. During this time, I had the honor to work with the late Gloria DeSorcy from the Consumers Association of Canada, Manitoba branch. I learned a great deal from Gloria, but the lesson I want to share tonight is the critical importance of an independent body to oversee regulated monopolies, such as Manitoba Hydro. When customers do not have a choice in where to spend their dollars, independent bodies protect them. Independent bodies fulfill important functions, such as reviewing rate structures, corporate policies, and development plans for their implication on rates. In doing so, they provide a layer of protection for captive consumers. They provide essential accountability for Crown corporations and important transparency for Manitobans. This is the role that the Public Utilities Board played in 2018 and 2019 when it said that Hydro's financial targets and capital spending were unreasonable from a rate-setting perspective and saved Manitobans from massive hydro rate increases. This is the role the PUB played in the 2014 Need for and Alternatives to review of Manitoba Hydro's preferred development plan, when the PUB said no to building Kanawapa. Independent oversight is essential for regulating monopolies. I respectfully submit Bill 36 restricts the independence of the PUB, Public Utilities Board, or board. I'll use three interchangeably. And as such, I request that the bill be withdrawn. The PUB acts in the public interest by setting just and reasonable rates for essential services. It has always done so as an independent authority, making its decisions based on the evidence before it. While I do not always like the decisions, I am confident that they are made based on the best available evidence. And I'm confident that the PUB carries out its duties independently. However, provisions in this bill compromise this independence in at least 4 key ways. Number 1, Bill 36 removes Manitoba Hydro from Part 4 of the Crown Corporations Governance and Accountability Act. Just going to call that the Crown Corporations Act. This type of legislation was introduced in 1989 to increase consumer confidence in regulated monopolies doing things like adding accountability mechanisms. Part 4 of the Act sets out what should be considered by the PUB in setting rates. It includes a variety of aspects like the cost of service, debt repayment, compelling policy decisions, and other factors which the board thinks is important. Bill 36 removes Manitoba Hydro from this section of the Act. Number 2, Bill 36 reduces the Public Utilities Board's ability to question policy. If you've ever watched a regulatory hearing, you know that decisions are made not in a vacuum. Activities, particularly those for Crown corporations, are shaped by the policies set by government. For example, the PUB's 2020 decision on Efficiency Manitoba includes 9 recommendations directed at legislative amendments, including recommendations to assure that Efficiency Manitoba is able to participate fully in an integrated resource planning process. By removing the PUB's express ability to question the validity of a regulation or directive, the board's decisions and recommendations start to narrow. 3, Bill 36 limits what the PUB consider in its decisions. Specifically, the PUB must must accept Manitoba Hydro's capital expenditure plan, needing the minister's permission to make recommendations for improvements. Bill 36 identifies financial targets, and here I'm talking about the timing for debt reduction. The bill sets out a rate cap, and now I'm referencing the famous 5%, which is determined in the legislation and not through evidence. The PUB cannot reduce rates for imprudent expenditures approved by Treasury Board. And please note, removing this is contrary to recommendation 5.3 of the Wall Commission. The PUB cannot propose a change in customer classification, and the bill sets out rates for different, or the bill sets out that rates for different customers or classes cannot differ based on affordability or other socioeconomic factors. These, as a whole, take away important tools that the PUB has to serve as its role as independent arbitrator for Manitoba's energy landscape. And number 4, Bill 36 makes the PUB's role in reviewing the Integrated Resource Plan, or IRP, discretionary. An IRP is a long-term forecast of supply and demand scenarios used to help utilities plan for the loads required to ensure Manitobans have access to safe, reliable electricity. Under Bill 36, whatever Manitoba Hydro ultimately produces with respect to an IRP may not be sent to the PUB for review. This step would happen at the discretion of government. The role of our independent authority to ensure that Manitobans have an extra layer to consider safe, reliable energy would be up to the government. And again, this is another change which is contrary to findings of the Wall Commission. And here I'm referencing recommendation 29, among others. According to 2 province-wide public opinion polls, one taken in 2022 and one in 2020, Manitobans overwhelmingly see the value of an independent body in setting energy rates. The PUB is this body. However, Bill 36 strips the ability of the PUB to review financial targets for their reasonableness and gives that authority to the legislature. It strips the authority of the PUB to review the day-to-day capital spending and gives that authority to Treasury Board. These are very important tools that the PUB has used to protect ratepayers in 2018, 2019, 2014, among others. By removing these powers from the PUB toolkit, Bill 36 sets up the PUB to be little more than a rubber stamp. It gifts Manitoba Hydro financial targets and capital expenditures that may never pass independent evidence-based reviews. I have several other concerns with this bill and the media surrounding this very complex legislation. These concerns include how the bill was introduced at a time when a number of key energy-related initiatives are underway in the province, how the bill limits public access to decision-making through changes to participant funding models and hearing formats, the use of regulation to change the energy landscape by more broadly permitting corporations to engage in the retail supply of power, and the use of this type of omnibus bill to change 3 very important pieces of legislation. But I will end my formal remarks now to returning to my main argument. For a regulated monopoly to effectively function, there needs to be strong oversight that is independent from government. The PUB has served this role well. Bill 36 will seriously compromise this board. As such, I respectfully ask that Bill 36 be withdrawn. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Fitzpatrick, for your presentation. We'll now move to questions. I'll just remind the members around the table, 30 seconds for your questions. Ms. Fitzpatrick, you have as much time as you want to respond, but we will cut the whole discussion off at 5 minutes. All right, Honourable Minister, you may begin.
Thank you, Dr. Fitzpatrick, for being here at committee evening. I appreciated your presentation. I took notes when you spoke. We agree that independent oversight and a rigorous PUB process is important. I disagree with you that the bill compromises that. But I wanted to ask you a question, hoping you can respond to this directly, and that is, there was no mention at any part in your presentation about debt at Manitoba Hydro that has tripled in the space of 6 years. Can you speak to debt and the stability of hydro and whether that's important to you?
Or Dr. Fitzpatrick.
Sorry, I'll get used to that process. Thank you. I can speak quite broadly. I've been hearing about the debt to equity ratio and reading about it. It first appears in my memory in the 2014 decision of the PUB. So when things are being newly constructed, there is an expectation that the debt to equity ratio will increase. And we are at a very high currently debt to equity ratio. However, it is not at a level that I believe was unforeseen in the 2014 decision. There is contrary evidence out there as to the degree to which it's impeding Manitoba Hydro's ability to borrow money at a preferred lending rate. I've seen the Moody's reports. I've also seen some compelling work by Polino Colivaco, which suggests that that's not an issue. I have concerns about the very short timeline that's set in place in the legislation for us to decrease that debt to equity ratio. How I generally explain it to my students is we're accelerating the time at which we're requiring Manitoba Hydro to pay down its, I'm going to use quotes here, mortgage. And so I'm not sure we need to accelerate the time as quickly. I've also seen some compelling research from William Harper that suggests with a 5% rate increase, which is set out by legislation, it will be impossible for Manitoba Hydro to achieve those deadlines. In sum, yes, I think that there is a concern about the debt to equity ratio. However, I believe that we need a more evidence-based approach at setting the timelines and targets for when Manitoba Hydro should be required to pay that down. Thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Sala.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fitzpatrick, for your presentation. It's greatly appreciated. I wanted to ask you, you referenced a number of the powers and authorities that the Public Utilities Board will lose should this bill pass. And I'm hoping you can elaborate on what you think the long-term impacts of that might be on rates here in Manitoba.
Dr. Fitzpatrick.
Thank you. I think the long-term impact on rates in Manitoba is that the rate setting structure will be politicized. I firmly believe that rates need to be set independent based on evidence, and we need to keep the politics out of rate setting as much as possible. I believe that the current approach of the PUB in evaluating the rate structure takes a holistic consideration. I believe that the provisions of the bill that limit what the PUB can take into account are particularly troubling. And so I would suggest that this is one of my main concerns about Bill 36 is threatening the independence of the PUB in setting rates. Furthermore, one thing to add is that in the two public opinion polls that I referenced previously, there was questions of Manitobans about what should be considered in setting the rates. And by far the majority of people said cost of service, it included debt repayment, included social policy. So it more firmly reflected what's currently in Part 4 of the Crown Accountability Act than what will be in place if Bill 36 passes. Thank you.
30 seconds remaining in total. Mr. Lamont, did you have a question? Okay. Are there other questions? Then seeing none, I will thank Dr. Fitzpatrick for her presentation and for spending time with the committee this evening. We're going to now move on to the next presenter, and I'll call Amanda Layton from Interchurch Council on Hydropower forward. Thank you. Ms. Layton, you can proceed with your presentation. You have up to 10 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening, committee members. My name is Amanda Layton, and I am here representing the Interchurch Council on Hydropower, formerly known as the Interfaith Task Force, of which I am a member. We are a nonpartisan advocacy group with a 50-year history working for justice with hydro-impacted communities and people. We are here today to express our concerns regarding Bill 36. Although there are many concerning amendments being proposed in this bill, I will be focusing on just a few. The first point I'd like you to consider is regarding amendments proposed to Section 39 of the Manitoba Hydro Act and the changes to how our electricity rates are set. It is alarming to us that the bill would like to take decision-making power for rate setting away from the Public Utilities Board and instead have rates established as the lesser of 5% or the inflation rate. With inflation increasing, I suppose we can expect inflation rates to be fairly high in the coming years. However, I would like to point out that Manitobans have not experienced a 5% rate increase in as far back as could be verified on the PUB website. The highest increase we have had in the last 10 years is 3.95%. In addition, Section 39 proposes that hearings would only be held every 3 years. We are unsure of the motivation behind this amendment, and in our view, a rate set 3 years in advance does not allow for accurate assessments using future predictions. As we all know, significant changes can happen beyond our ability to predict. We appreciate that the amendments include the ability to reopen a hearing if there is a material change or a drop in the inflation. However, we believe that flexible settings are an important process, and we strongly oppose the 3-year schedule. The Public Utilities Board has protected Manitobans from higher than necessary hydro rates by striving to ensure that Manitobans have safe and reliable access to necessary public services at just and reasonable rates. When applying for an increase in rates, all utilities under the PUB's jurisdiction must justify the revenue requirements that support a requested rate increase. In addition, given that several large utilities under PUB oversight are Crown corporations, publicly owned and operated by the government, the PUB is a crucial entity for ensuring neutral, objective analysis of proposed rates. The PUB operates independently from government. They fairly and transparently weigh the financial needs of the utility with the needs of ratepayers in their rate-setting decisions. It feels appropriate here to point out that the Public Utilities Board hearings are not too costly, as recently asserted by the current government. Let me direct your attention to a quote from an open letter sent to Premier Heather Stephenson in July of this year from the Manitoba branch of the Consumers Coalition of Canada. It's a quote, "PUB hearings are cost-effective and provide good value for taxpayers. The hydro hearings, for example, cost a typical residential customer $2.50 extra on their bill per year. That same customer saved $50 per year on their hydro bill annually as a result of the PUB hearing." A major motivator for our council is the PUB's consideration of all Manitobans, which was made apparent when they created the First Nations on-reserve rate class, since repealed by Manitoba Hydro and overturned by the courts in 2020 on the grounds that the PUB did not have the jurisdiction to create this new class. The PUB recognized an opportunity for real reconciliation between the Crown Corporation and impacted First Nations and took action that we supported. In the PUB's order following the repeal in 2020, the PUB made sure that Manitoba Hydro removed the 0.13% additional incremental increase embedded into the general rate that was compensating for the 0% increase for the First Nations on-reserve rate. The PUB called Manitoba Hydro out for attempting to continue charging the additional incremental increase even after the First Nations on-reserve rate was removed and their rates were increased 6.5% in 1 year in order to get on par with general rate class. We bring this to your attention in order to emphasize two things: that the PUB has ensured that all Manitobans are part of their decision-making, including those impacted by hydro development and colonization. And number two, they are paying attention and actively keeping Manitoba Hydro accountable. I will talk about the threat to their oversight in just a moment. There are other changes to the Manitoba Hydro Act and Bill 36 that cause us unease, such as the removal of Manitoba Hydro's requirement to maintain their sinking fund, the changes to what qualifies as a major new facility, and making changes to the financial targets. But I will let another more qualified presenter speak to those very important issues if they haven't already. I would like to now turn your attention to the amendments made to the Public Utilities Act. This portion of the bill has us asking many questions, all of which pull on a similar thread. is the government attempting to all but remove the PUB of its power to independently review and set the course for future public utility projects, and at the same time, remove the public from participating? Two new provisions found in Bill 36 are highly concerning to us. The first is a provision that prohibits the PUB from inquiring or making statements questioning the validity of regulations established by the government or about any directive issued under the Crown Corporations Governance and Accountability Act or the Financial Administration Act. A few years ago, Manitoba passed a regulation relating to MPI that was beyond their legislative competence, which claimed to set financial targets for rate-setting purposes for MPI. The PUB was asked to determine if it was unlawful. After the PUB investigated, it found that the regulation was invalid for rate-setting purposes. This is a practical example of how the PUB has been there to protect ratepayers when the legislature exceeds its legislative authority. Without more information to understand the significance of this alteration, this appears to be an act of silencing and undermines the important role of accountability that the PUB offers. The second is Section 15.3, which allows for closed-door meetings if discussing commercially sensitive information. Currently, the Act states that all meetings are open to the public with no stipulations. Are there considerations and provisions in place that will prevent the abuse of this option? Our concern is that meetings will increasingly become private, taking the public out of the procedure altogether. In addition to this, Section 24 is removing the requirement of oral hearings, allowing for written hearings only, again, distancing the public from the process. We are strongly opposed to this amendment and appeal that all hearings remain oral, engaging public participation. What is the motivation behind this proposed change? The results of a recent public opinion poll are clear. Manitobans want an independent arm's-length board overseeing the rate-setting process and new proposed projects, and we couldn't agree more. A Probe Research survey report found that out of 1,017 Manitobans, more than 7 in 10 want an independent commission or board to set their rates. This same poll found that 61% of people surveyed think that an independent board should have authority over customer class creation, which speaks to my earlier point on First Nations on Reserves rate. In conclusion, Bill 36 does not appear to have Manitobans in mind, and we hope that this committee will do what's right for our province. And if that's not clear, say no to Bill 36. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Layton, for your presentation. We'll now move on to the questions. 30 seconds for the members to ask. Go ahead, Minister Friesen.
Thank you, Ms. Layton, for your presentation. You indicated that you were unaware whether the PUB had ever approved rates of 5%. In 2004, 2008, and 2012, PUB approved rate increases of 5%, and 4.4%. Were you aware that with the test of the legislation, the increases in every single one of those years except for one would have been actually significantly lower if this test of 5% or CPI had been in place?
Ms. Layton?
Sorry. I think what you're saying is if this was in place, they would have been 5%, right? That's not what you're saying. They would have been lower, you're saying.
They would have been lower, sorry.
I don't want to try to understand everything. This part of this is going to be difficult for me, but I looked on the PUB orders and I did not see that in those years, and I looked at every single one, so I wasn't aware.
Emily Sala.
Thank you so much, Ms. Layton, for your presentation. Thank you for your work with the Interchurch Council on hydropower. It's greatly appreciated. Just wondering if you could comment. You did identify that the bill removes the ability for the pub to comment on government policy and regulation. You referenced that. What do you think the impacts of that will be, taking that away? You did allude to some concerns there when it comes to preferential rates or specific rates for some communities. But could you elaborate on your concerns about the impacts of that aspect of the bill?
Ms. Layton. It's okay.
Yes. The public isn't able to, most of the time, even understand the legislation that's put forward, and so we look to independent bodies to read that right for us. And so, unfortunately, it's hard for us to trust that the government has our best interests, which is unfortunate, but it's true. That's why we have an independent body. So not really answering you directly, but in a roundabout way, I'm saying that for the public, it's important to have somebody whose money isn't on the table.
Mr. Lamont, do you have a question?
Thank you very much for your presentation. Can you just talk a bit about your work on hydro-impacted communities? Because I know that that's been an issue going back decades, and that there's a fair bit of reclamation and other things that and quite frankly, compensation would be worthwhile. So if you could just explain or just talk a little bit about that or tell us about that.
Ms. Layton.
Yes. Pardon me, you guys. I don't know all the process. So the Interchurch Council on Hydropower, formerly known as Interfaith Task Force, has been working with northern communities for over 50 years. So you'll be familiar with some of that work. Currently, there's still many people whose livelihoods don't feel compensated, and compensation is biased. So if money is the answer to compensation, then perhaps Manitoba Hydro and the government feel that they've done enough. But for people whose lives have been completely devastated by the destruction on their rivers and in their land, money isn't the answer. So the work that we are trying to do is to advocate for compassionate policy changing and even just relationship building between those of us in the South and those in the North who actually feel the impacts. So currently that's the work.
All right, thank you. Are there any additional questions from members of the committee? No? All right, I thank you very much, Ms. Layton, for your presentation and for taking time with us this evening. I'm now going to move on to the next next witness, and I will call Sean Kettner, private citizen, forward. Sorry? I didn't catch the first part. They're online right now. All right, Sean Kettner. I believe we see you there on the screen. All right, and you can begin with your presentation. You have up to 10 minutes to make it. Go ahead.
Thank you, and good evening to the committee meetings members. My name is Sean Kettner. I am a resident of Winnipeg, a private citizen, a retired business owner, and I have lived my whole life in Winnipeg, although at the moment I'm in New York City. So it's been a challenge to be here this evening, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak to you remotely. I'm here today because I strongly believe that the Public Utility Board serves a vital role to ensure that the future of Manitoba is a bright one. The Public Utility Board has served the people of Manitoba and our Crown corporations well and should continue to do so in the future. A secure financial future for Manitoba is dependent on Manitoba Hydro. As we know, as we move forward to the electrification and greening of our society, Manitoba Hydro will make the difference between us being a have and a have-not province. We must maintain a healthy, vibrant Crown corporation that continues to be owned by the people of Manitoba. And I am very concerned about the amendments that are proposed by Bill 36 and the request that this bill not be adopted. Allowing the government to set a financial target in law sets a very dangerous precedence. Bill 36 will reduce the pub's independence and does not allow for evidence from other interveners to question and challenge the material presented by Manitoba Hydro. The government of the day should be advised by those who have the future of a healthy Manitoba Hydro for all Manitobans as a priority, and decisions, including rate setting, should be decided without political intervention and be above and beyond the political will of the day. Bill 36 provides no information on the rules for setting gas rates, and by allowing these to be created through regulation, they could happen with no warning or no public review. These rates could be altered for any number of reasons, and that opens the door to rate setting for reasons other than the well-being of our Crown Corporation. According to recent public opinion polls, as recently mentioned in the last presentation, commissioned by the Consumers Coalition, Manitobans want rates set by an independent arm's length commission or board. And that is exactly what the pub is under the current legal rules. However, Bill 36 reduces the independence of pub because it will no longer be able to determine what, if any, financial targets are reasonable. Furthermore, Bill 36 adds specific deadlines for paying off Manitoba Hydro's debt that do not work. The math just doesn't add up. Even for a private citizen who really doesn't know that much about it, if you just look at it, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. There is so much concern that the debt to capitalization ratio is too aggressive, and that can't realistically be achieved even with the maximum 5% increase over many years. Bill 36 gives the pub an impossible task when making decisions and prevents it from ensuring Manitoba Hydro's financial health into the future. There is little evidence that the debt to capitalization ratio is based on sound planning or is needed. The Public Utility Board takes the politics out of rate setting. It protects us, Manitobans, from the present and future governments politicizing the rates. It avoids governments playing politics with crown monopolies, such as the avoidance of rate increases that happened in election years, like in the 1980s and 2000s in Manitoba and the 2010s in BC. It also eliminates cross-subsidizing politically sensitive groups, as was done with the farm trucks in the 1980s. Rate setting for political gain must be prohibited, and the best way to do that is to maintain the pub. Previous attempts to pass a bill like this one contain different debt to capitalization ratio targets, suggesting that the number chosen is arbitrary. The pub has found in previous hearings that suggested debt to capitalization ratio were not necessary. The 5% annual increase limit was introduced as a protection from inflation. Increases of 5% or more are extremely rare historically, as Amanda mentioned. Hydro is less affected by inflation rates than the numbers that get published, which are for consumers. Hydro isn't paying for rent or clothing for family or buying food or many of the other goods that go into calculating the consumer price index. I feel that promoting the 5% increase as a protection to taxpayers, to Manitobans, is deceptive. The bond rating agencies are telling us, our government, you, that they value the independence of the pub and the vigor it brings to the rate setting in Manitoba. The math tells the true story. Bill 36 is not based on math and needs to be rejected or amended to reflect the numbers, not the political agenda of this or any future governing party. The rate setting process must remain transparent and accessible. Typical interveners at the pub hearings include the Consumers Association of Manitoba, which of course represents our low-income Manitobans, the Manitoba Industrial Power Users Group, Indigenous groups, and other businesses engaged in the provision or maintenance of electricity in Manitoba, who, as it stands now, have an opportunity to engage. Bill 36 could limit hearings from live in-person settings in favor of strictly written presentations, and in some cases, rate hearings could be completely done behind closed doors. Transparency in decision-making is essential, particularly when Manitoba Hydro is a de facto monopoly and a crown corporation. According to the recent opinion polls commissioned by the Consumers Coalition, Manitobans think there should be public input on these decisions. Furthermore, and the most troubling to me, Bill 36 is not in line with other legislation in Manitoba. Bill 36 introduces new rules that require Manitoba Hydro to get approval from the government of Manitoba for a new category of hydroelectric generation and transmission projects classified as major new facilities. This new category of project is not consistent with the classes of development used in Manitoba's environmental assessment process and means that some hydroelectric projects that require the highest level of review under the Environmental Act, Class 3, will not be considered big enough or expensive enough to fit the definition of a major new facility. Some large hydroelectric projects that will require the highest level of the environmental assessment and public scrutiny under the Environmental Act will not be required to be reviewed by the pub, reducing the amount of information available to the public and decision makings about the potential impacts of proposed hydroelectric projects. Bill 36 could trigger a change in policy towards less environmental review of new electric transmission and generation projects. These new review requirements are unclear and inconsistent with current environmental legislation. We must ask that all hydroelectric projects would require the highest level of public and government scrutiny and be reviewed by an independent tribunal before they are approved to ensure best practices are followed. And lastly, Bill 36 will require the pub to set rates for 3-year periods instead of every year, making it less likely rather than more likely to account for a rapidly changing energy market. The pub serves the citizens of Manitoba well. Bill 36 is flawed, and I ask that it be withdrawn. Thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you, Ms. Kedner, for your presentation. We'll now move to questions. The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Ms. Kedner, for your presentation this evening. We don't have long together, so I'll move quickly. You indicated that you value a secure financial future for Manitoba. We agree. I think where we disagree is that you don't seem to think it's linked to hydro sustainability. We see a clear link between hydro sustainability and the low rate advantage that Manitobans have enjoyed that would give them that secure financial future. I'm just wondering, you indicated you didn't think hydro was sensitive to inflation. Can you expand on that, why you think that hydro isn't sensitive to inflation and now pays $1 billion a year?
Ms. Kedner.
Sorry. As a private citizen, I see all of the money that was spent on hydro to build all of the infrastructure over the last number of years. And I've been around a long time. I've watched through the years as Manitoba Hydro has been developed. And now we know that electricity is a in-demand commodity. We know that hydropower has got the potential to bring money into our province. We know that the lines have been open to the US. We have potential to be selling across the country. We know that electricity and hydropower, although we still need to figure out ways to make it as equitable and deal with the concerns of the communities in the north, and that is a huge concern. But we know that hydro is potentially the one and only way that Manitoba is going to be able to flourish going into the future. And we look at the cost of development over all of these years. Now it's payback time, and now it's time to reap the benefits of all of that investment. And that is why I think it's very, very important that we look towards the future, towards the potential sale of hydro, and towards the possibility of Manitoba having an income from the hydro in order to help us move to a more sustainable future.
Mr. Sala.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kedner, for your fantastic presentation. I want to thank you also for reinforcing the importance of the hydro investments we've made historically in this province and the value of those going forward. One thing I wanted to ask you about was regarding the financial targets, the debt to equity targets that we've seen put into this bill. It's one of the most concerning aspects of the bill. We've seen the Consumers Association say that It's expected that hydro will be expected to raise around $5 billion by 2040 as a function of those financial targets. What do you think the long-term impacts of that inclusion of those aggressive financial targets will be should Bill 36 be allowed to pass?
Before I recognize Ms. Kettner, just ask the members to try to keep their questions to 30 seconds. Thank you. Ms. Kettner.
I think, as Ms. Layton said, and Dr. Fitzpatrick, that there is the unrealistic expectation to pay this back quickly. And I don't think that Manitobans expect that that money will be paid back. And the reason that we're not concerned is because the rate setters, the bond setters are saying it's okay. It's not a terrible thing to have a mortgage, nor is it terrible to have debt when you know, in fact, you have potential for paying it back over a reasonable amount of time. If we are trying to pay it back really quickly, then it's going to implode on us. And I think that is certainly problematic. And I think we need to allow if you look back at the number of years that these projects have been going on, that was taken into consideration in the planning, and we need to take that into consideration as we move ourselves from the have-nots to the haves as we reap the benefits of the sale of electricity going forward.
Thank you, Ms. Kettner. Are there further questions from members of the committee? All right, seeing none, I'm going to thank you very much for your presentation and for your time spending it with us this evening. And we'll now move on to the next presenter. I will call Lorena Mitchell. Lorena Mitchell from Manitoba Sustainable Energy. I'll just give a moment for the camera to come up. All right, Lorena Mitchell, I think I can see you there. Okay, great. We can get started, and you have up to 10 minutes to make your presentation.
Thank you. My name is Lorena Mitchell, and I'm the chair of MANSEA, the Manitoba Sustainable Energy Association. I'm also the owner of Evolve Green. I have witnessed a lot of stuff over the years with the pub, and I too am gravely concerned that the teeth are being taken out of it. And my concern is that, are we setting this up so that hydro could be later privatized or partially privatized? What will that mean for Manitobans after all of this investment? How do we maintain the transparency? I feel that that is definitely something that is being impacted for the public, for myself, for my children's future, and for the future of Manitoba. I think that it is really imperative that we maintain a transparency to how things are done. And I have seen the pub and the kinds of questions that they ask really elaborate, and they're able to see where they're not able to challenge. If this bill were to move forward, it really takes the teeth away. They're not able to even challenge what's about to happen. The 5% increase, that part isn't a huge issue for me. I would like to see the Public Utilities Board continue to be a part of the rate setting versus, just having this language moving forward and it being between the government and Manitoba Hydro. This is a Crown corporation. We're a monopoly here. And I really want to see the Public Utilities Board maintain in Manitoba in its current capacity and allowing the public to have their voice. When it comes to the environment, they've really also stepped up to the plate. And I think that, if anything, some of the huge commitments that hydro has made with building these new hydro dams has created a situation where everything is in one place. This is going to become a really big consideration down the road. Them building extra dams, what's happening is you've got the 10th largest lake in the entire world, fresh water, Lake Winnipeg, being impacted by raising of lake levels and algae, which creates a huge problem within the lake water. And you're going to need this water for Manitobans at some point, especially the city of Winnipeg, as it needs to look for alternatives for water. So I think that even just when we're looking at environmental impact, there will not be or will be a reduced oversight when it comes to environmental impact and future projects. So this is of grave concern. I really want to impress upon you that in its current form, and I'm not saying that some of Bill 36 is fine. Just what you try to tuck in there are all the parts and pieces of it, especially with the pub. I don't believe it can move forward in its current form. It needs to be really gone over and rewritten. This is actually all I wanted to say to you guys, and thank you for allowing me to speak before the committee today.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. Mitchell. We'll now move to questions. Once again, 30 seconds for the members to ask the questions and 5 minutes in total. Honorable Minister Friesen.
Thank you, Ms. Mitchell. Thanks for being at committee. The bill is designed to ensure that Manitoba Hydro remains strong and on a stable foundation to be able to give that good rate advantage to ratepayers for years in the future. You talked about your concern for an independent PUB. We want that as well. Are you aware of the new powers the bill would give to the PUB to be able to review and approve future large capital projects that Hydro could build?
Ms. Mitchell. Sorry, Ms. Mitchell, you just have to wait for me to acknowledge you, and then you can start. And they're muting you so I can see your lips moving, but none of us can hear what you were saying anyway, so no worries. But you can now respond. Thank you.
Yes, I am aware that that is in there, but in its current form, it cannot be allowed to move forward. There is too much language that is also taking away the public ability to have oversight, and the pub is required to do that.
Mr. Sala.
Thank you so much, Ms. Mitchell, for making time to bring this presentation to us tonight. You mentioned something that really resonates, it's really important, which is the importance of keeping Manitoba Hydro public, all of Manitoba Hydro public. We've seen this government privatize a subsidiary of Hydro. We've seen them get rid of a huge number of IBW employees and replace them with contract employees. They've recently handed over control over fiber optic network to a private company. Why is it so important that we keep all of Manitoba Hydro public?
Ms. Mitchell.
It is really important that we do, because it is basically a monopoly here in Manitoba, and we should have a say in its future, all of Manitoba, not just some of Manitoba.
Mr. Lamont, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you. I want to thank Ms. Mitchell. Can you just for a moment explain a bit of your background and your business, just because I understand you do have a lot of expertise in dealing with hydro and dealing with electricity?
Ms. Mitchell.
Absolutely do. I absolutely do. So I am 15 years in the industry for renewable energy. I design both commercial and residential size solar systems, storage systems, backup, you name it. I have a lot of dealings with hydro, actually, and I believe the pub has really fought hard to help continue hydro in the right direction, going towards a sustainable future. They do definitely have, for instance, I took part in this next 20 year, their plan, and it didn't really even grasp what kind of changes are going to happen in the next 5 years, never mind 20 years. And that was because they lacked public participation. They hired a consultancy group that wasn't even from Manitoba. We need to really start taking a hold of this, and Manitobans need to speak to hydro. And if we take away more and more of what the pub can do and allowing the public to have their say, we're just making that farther apart. So what we need to do is bring it together. We need to have Manitobans say what they need to say, and everybody gets to hear it. Whereas the other way, it's just gone. It's just gone.
Follow-up question, Mr. Sala.
Thanks for that response, Ms. Mitchell. I just wanted to ask, you referenced you participated in the development, I believe, you referenced a 20-year plan. I think you're referencing the energy policy work that's being done. Can you comment on the wisdom of bringing forward a bill like Bill 36 while this energy policy is still being developed?
Ms. Mitchell.
Yeah, I think that it's ill-timed, but it also is not worded correctly. And then they are addressing some very key things that are good in Bill 36, and with EV charging and all of those things that need to happen. You need to change the legislature. You need to change the language. However, I just want to say that when you're talking about putting together a 20-year plan, and now you're talking about taking away all of Manitobans' right to even respond to that, it doesn't make sense to me. Are they asking key people? Well, they actually didn't reach out to a lot of First Nations when that was done. So it's exceedingly frustrating. They don't know even key Manitoban areas to talk to about it.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. Mitchell, for your presentation and for interacting with the committee on the questions that we had for you. I'm now going to call our next presenter, and it's Shoshana Kraut. I believe Shoshana Kraut is virtual, so we'll just give folks a moment to bring them up. Thanks so much. All right, while we're waiting for Shoshana Kraut to come, I'll just remind the committee members that we've got 10 minutes for presentation, 5 minutes for questions, 30 seconds each MLA for questions, and unlimited time up to the 5-minute limit for those who are answering the questions. And I'm told the tech behind this committee room is a little bit slow. So we're going to get our next presenter up shortly.
Able to join right now?
All right, we can see
I don't know
your...
if you can hear me or not. Sorry, it's not, I have to, it's not working for me. I'm going to have to try and switch devices.
Okay.
Just give me if you could get the next panelist and I'll try and get online on something else.
We will do that. Yeah, we can
okay,
move
thank you,
on
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem. We'll move on to the next presenter, and that is Heather Fast from Manitoba Eco Network. Is Heather Fast available? All right, Ms. Fast, welcome to the committee. You have up to 10 minutes to make your presentation, and then we'll get into questions. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Thanks. Good evening. My name is Heather Fast, and I'm the Policy Advocacy Director of the Manitoba Eco Network. Tonight, I'm speaking with you from Treaty 1, the territory of the Cree, Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis peoples. It's also important to acknowledge that the water I drink comes from Treaty 3 territory, and the power I use comes from Treaty 5 territory and beyond. Since 1988, the Manitoba Eco Network has promoted positive environmental action by supporting people and groups in our community. Our programming focuses on policy advocacy, engagement in consultation processes, and developing capacity building tools that benefit the environmental nonprofit sector and our member groups. We are a public interest environmental organization seeking to promote and facilitate good environmental governance and the protection of Manitoba's environment for the benefit of current and future generations. The Manitoba Eco Network is a member of the Protect the PUB Coalition, and I'm here today to provide insight into some of the many concerns about this bill that we have been hearing from Manitobans. The main point of my comments is that we think Bill 36 should be withdrawn. As you will hear from the many presenters signed up to speak on this bill, there are a wide range of concerns that need to be addressed through public consultation before legislation of this type is enacted. In particular, there's a need to maintain the independence and effectiveness of the Public Utilities Board and ensure citizens are given meaningful opportunity to participate in decision-making processes. My presentation today will therefore not be focused on suggested amendments to the bill. Instead, I'll discuss some of the key problems that Bill 36 will exacerbate if this bill is not withdrawn. But first, I'd just like to note that I specialize in and teach statutory interpretation and want to be clear that this omnibus bill has been a challenge for everyone to get through and understand, no matter what level of reading comprehension they may have. This is perhaps why political discourse on this bill has focused on such a small piece of the overall changes that could occur. Either way, this is why the use of omnibus legislation to implement complicated legal changes is discouraged by those of us who advocate for meaningful public participation in legislative processes. It creates confusion and makes public participation even more difficult. So I commend everyone that has come here today in an attempt to try and explain their perspectives on this very complicated piece of legislation. As you may already be aware, the Manitoba Eco Network is a regular participant in public consultation processes and administrative tribunal proceedings, including public hearings held by the Public Utilities Board. We think the PUB plays an important role in Manitoba and is trusted by the public to provide independent oversight of important processes like the setting of gas and electricity rates and review of the activities of Manitoba Hydro and Efficiency Manitoba, among other things. This is why we're so concerned with the changes that will occur to the Public Utilities Board Act as a result of Part 2 of Bill 36 and other related sections. We are particularly concerned with proposed changes to restrict the authority of the PUB with respect to Manitoba Hydro and any analysis of regulations or directives of the Government of Manitoba. The Manitoba Eco Network is also concerned that a number of proposed changes will reduce opportunity for meaningful public participation in PUB hearings. This includes removing existing flexibility in terms of when rate hearings can be held, no longer requiring oral hearings and allowing for written hearings to be held instead, and putting limits on hearing costs before knowing who wants to participate and what the scope of the hearing may be. Other parts of Bill 36 will also limit meaningful public involvement. For example, under the proposed new Section 38.1 of the Manitoba Hydro Act, Hydro's integrated resource plans will not be required to undergo a public review by the PUB. It will be up to the discretion of the minister to decide if they want the PUB's feedback or not. There will also be no required public consultation period associated with integrated resource plans. Manitoba Hydro will only be required to describe any stakeholder consultations that have been carried out, with no specific requirements that must be met to ensure meaningful engagement. Overall, we strongly disagree with suggestions that Bill 36 will benefit the public. Bill 36 will in fact have the opposite impact and will reduce the opportunity for meaningful public participation in important energy governance processes. For this reason alone, the bill should be withdrawn. Another significant concern the Manitoba Eco Network has with Bill 36 involves the creation of a new category of projects called major new facilities. While we strongly encourage thorough review of all proposed large developments in Manitoba, the way major new facility has been defined in Part 1 of Bill 36 does not align with the way proposed new developments are classified in the provincial environmental assessment process. The Environment Act and its regulations, which set out the requirements for environmental assessment in Manitoba, divide projects into 3 categories: Class 1, Class 2, and Class 3. Each class requires an increasing level of scrutiny, with Class 3 projects being recognized as having the most potential to cause negative impacts, and therefore requiring the highest level of review and public participation before approval. It would seem to make the most sense to us that the definition of major new facility would align with the definition of a Class 3 development. So all Class 3 hydroelectric and transmission projects would be required to undergo a needs for and alternatives to review before such projects are licensed under the Environment Act. However, this is not the case. Based on the 200 megawatt threshold and financial requirements imposed by the new Section 16.5 of the Manitoba Hydro Act, which are stricter than the requirements for a Class 3 development, only a small number of Class 3 developments will actually trigger an NFAT review. While we would love to see a required NFAT review for all classes of proposed developments in Manitoba, at a minimum, all Class 3 developments should be required to undergo this additional review, and the definition of major new facility should reflect this. Although I've only discussed a few major issues today and avoided most of the financial stuff, I want to emphasize that there are many other problems with Bill 36, as you will hear from my fellow presenters who are much more capable of discussing those other issues. There's clearly more time needed to consult with concerned stakeholders and develop a new approach to energy governance in Manitoba that better aligns with public interests and other important legal processes like environmental assessment and licensing under the Environment Act. It's in the best interest of all Manitobans to protect the independence and effectiveness of the PUB and ensure the public continues to have a meaningful role in review and decision-making processes. As a result, the Manitoba Eco Network strongly recommends Bill 36 be withdrawn. Thank you for your time and consideration of our recommendations.
Thank you very much, Ms. Fast, for your presentation. We will now move into questions. The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Ms. Fast, for being here and for making your comments. I wanted you to know that from the government's perspective, it's our intention to expand and keep the authority of the PUB not restricted, as you say. I wondered if you would just comment on Section 16 of the bill that talks about a new mechanism whereby a public review would be necessary by the Public Utility Board before the development of major new facilities. I wonder if you could talk about the fact that that didn't take place before, and wouldn't this create then a improvement?
Ms. Fast.
I would have to take a look at the bill again, and since it's very complicated and I don't want to waste time, I don't think I can speak specifically to your question. But I will say that at the Eco Network, we would strongly support any future regulatory changes that is going to improve the assessment of proposed projects in Manitoba, particularly hydroelectric developments, since, as many of us know, most of our major hydroelectric generating stations are currently only operating under a Water Power Act license and haven't actually undergone the environmental assessment process. So any improvements that can be made on that front, we would very much like to see.
Mr. Sala.
Thank you, Ms. Fast, for your presentation, and thank you for your work with the Manitoba Eco Network. One thing you referenced is that as a representative of the Eco Network that you have acted as an intervener in previous rate hearings. We know that Bill 36 restricts the opportunities for interveners to have their say or to be heard in rate setting processes. Could you share a bit about your concern or your thoughts around the impact of that limiting of the opportunity for interveners to be part of the rate setting process?
Ms. Fast.
So actually, the Manitoba Eco Network most often takes the opportunity to participate through public presentations. So we may not actually be an intervener. We often collaborate with organizations that do have that status, since we have been especially resource strapped since we've lost our core funding. However, that's one of the main reasons that we are so concerned with some of the changes, such as the ability to have a written hearing only, because it would reduce the opportunity for organizations like ours to engage even in a small way in some of these very important regulatory proceedings. So I can't speak to the experience of an intervener. We are currently an intervener in the current Clean Environment Commission hearing that's ongoing. So I'll have feedback on that down the road. But for now, I would just emphasize that it's really important for resource-strapped organizations to be able to make a public presentation and participate in some way when it comes to regulatory proceedings.
Mr. Lamont, do you have a question?
is that that there's essentially a budget restriction being placed on the PUB. So I'm wondering whether that, how you see that as being, or the fact that they're going to have to sort of apply for funding to explain how for the cost of it. I sort of think, you know, it's a stitch in time saves nine, I think is it. That it's a way, if we're going to be spending $10 million on it, on a hearing, we may be able to save hundreds of $millions or billions of dollars. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
Ms. Fast.
I did unfortunately miss the first part of your question. It didn't quite come through to me. But in terms of responding to the piece I did hear, I think it would be premature to try and determine what the potential hearing costs of something might be when you're not even aware of what the potential scope may be or who the stakeholders are going to engage in the process. Having the ability for flexibility in terms of the types of costs that can be ordered and that type of thing can be very beneficial from a public participation angle, and would allow interveners sometimes to bring in evidence that otherwise would not be able to be heard if hearing costs were limited before the hearing was even developed or decided what the scope of it will be.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Fast, for your presentation today and for taking time to also answer questions from members of the committee. At this time, I'd like to ask leave from the committee if we can check back with Shoshana Kraut to see if she's able to join us at this time. Is there agreement?
Agreed.
Thank you. Then we will now call on Shoshana Kraut to see if she's able to join the committee at this time. All right, I believe I can see you on the screen there, Ms. Kraut. Welcome to the committee. You have up to 10 minutes to make your presentation, and after that, we'll have an up to a 5-minute question period. You can go ahead and begin your presentation when you're ready.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present to the committee tonight regarding Bill 36. I'm a private citizen. I believe that Bill 36 is not in the best interest of ratepayers, Manitobans, and more specifically, communities that have been significantly impacted by Manitoba Hydro operations. I believe in an independent public utility board that balances the needs of ratepayers, Manitobans, and communities that have been impacted by Manitoba Hydro operations, Manitoba Hydro and the Manitoba government. I strongly support an independent public utility board that is wholly responsible for providing transparent rate-setting rates. I do not believe that the Manitoba government should legislate financial targets for rate-setting purposes. Specifically, I want to speak about my concerns about Section 38. First, I'm going to provide a definition of what an integrated resource plan is. According to E. Hurst and C. Goldman in Key Issues of Integrated Resource Planning for Electric Utilities, an integrated resource plan is a means for utilities and state regulatory commissions to consistently assess a variety of demand and supply resources to cost-effectively meet customer energy service needs. However, in Section 38, it is not required that an IRP would be referred to the regulator. This concerns me a great deal. I believe that an IRP is a wonderful document that provides a basis for rate-setting purposes. From the IRP document and report, the capital expenditure forecast is made, and that is part of determining the rates that should be done. Rates. I also believe that this is part of making sure it's important that the IRP process is transparent. I do not think that a report that Manitoba Hydro submits to the Minister of the Manitoba government with limited public engagement at the initial planning stages of the report is sufficient to provide public engagement. I also believe that the IRP I believe that the Public Utility Board should measure the interests of the ratepayers, Manitobans in general, and specifically communities that have been negatively impacted by Manitoba Hydro operations, Manitoba Hydro and the Manitoba government in the integrated resource planning process and final report, in a similar fashion to Nova Scotia Power and its commission. Nova Scotia Power and its commission have been producing IRP reports from 2007, 2009, 2014, and 2020. The process is clear and transparent. By making an integrated resource plan report submitted to the minister rather than submitted to the Public Utility Board for consultation with Manitobans, communities that have been impacted by Manitoba's operations, the process is not clear or transparent. I also believe that there is something that has been missed in section 38.8.3.1. Points A to F describe what the integrated resource plan ought to contain. I believe there's another point that would be of value to consider in an integrated resource planning process. Manitoba Hydro has 15 hydro generating stations. Several of these stations have approached or are approaching 100 years of service. It would be prudent to consider the costs and benefits of these stations as part of an integrated resource plan. This is the core of a resource plan, to consider supply against the demand and determine a cost-effective and appropriate planning outcome. This would improve the transparency of decisions around these aging generating stations. It is worth noting that an IRP also considers the values and costs of existing assets rather than just new builds. Multiple examples of IRPs that, if you wish, I can list, also include discussions and considerations of retiring of existing assets once they've reached the end of their life. I thank you for your time, and I ask that the Bill 36 be withdrawn.
Thank you so much for your presentation. And if you're wondering if perhaps the chair lost his hair and looks a little younger, and I won't go too far down that road, but he had to step away for a moment, and I'm sitting in for him. Let's get back down to business here. And the minister does have some comments. So, Minister, please go ahead. The Honourable Minister.
Ms. Crowd, thank you for joining us this evening at committee. I really appreciate your presentation and your thoughts on the IRP. We do believe it's high time for Manitoba Hydro to do a much more comprehensive evaluation of its needs, of its assets. I really appreciate your comments as well in terms of also evaluating those legacy assets. So that's food for thought. I thank you for that. Just wanted to ask you to comment. The IRP is published, and it can, of course, be referred to the PUB. Does that give you more comfort?
Ms. Kraut, please go ahead.
I apologize. The IRP is at the core of a rate setting process. It is one of the first documents that needs to be produced to provide a transparent and appropriate rate for the benefit of the utility, the government, Manitobans, and ratepayers. And it is insufficient to simply produce it as a report and publish it online and possibly provide it to the PUB at some point in the future.
Mr. Sala has a question. Mr. Sala, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kraut, for your presentation. It's greatly appreciated, and it's great that you made the time to come here to share your concerns about Bill 36. This is a really important opportunity, and grateful that you're here. Just wanted to comment, or I appreciate your referencing of the IRP and the importance of that. That's a significant process. We haven't had one undertaken in some time within Manitoba Hydro. What are your thoughts about the idea of the IRP, which is currently being developed right now, again, which hasn't been done in many years, and then at the same time bringing forward a bill like Bill 36, which is transformational in terms of rate setting? What are your thoughts and comments on the wisdom of bringing forward this bill while this IRP is currently in development?
Ms. Kraut, please go ahead.
I think that it is important to legislate an IRP. I do not believe that Bill 36 is, and how it's been presented in Bill 36 is good enough. I think that part of the problem with developing an IRP without legislation to back it is it's very difficult to know what to do with it, because the guidance would be in the legislation that's required to create it. Yeah.
Mr. Lamont.
Yes, thank you very much for your presentation. It's much appreciated. I guess the one question I have is if you can just speak a bit about your concerns around the way that rates are being set in this bill. I know that the PUB, ideally it's independent and is able to set these prices on its own. So if you could just talk about your concerns about that, or expand on your concerns about that level.
Ms. Kraut, please go ahead. Ms. Kraut.
I believe that in order for rates to be transparent and also sufficient for the utility, and also take into account ratepayers, that it really needs to be set by otherwise, I don't know if the rates would be appropriate for ratepayers and for the utility to continue its operations.
Are there any further questions? Seeing none, Ms. Kraut, we thank you for your time and presentation, and we will now move to number 7 presenter. I hope I say this correctly, Neil Harney. Did I say your name accurately? Niall. Yeah. We had a mini discussion here. My apologies. Niall, welcome, and please go ahead. You have up to 10 minutes to make your presentation, and then there will be up to 5 minutes of interaction following your presentation. The clock starts now. Please go ahead.
Great, thank you. So my name is Niall Harney. I am a senior researcher at the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, Manitoba, where I hold the Earl Black Chair in Labour Issues. The Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives is Canada's leading progressive research institute with offices across the country. We publish independent research on a wide range of public policy topics and regularly comment on Manitoba Hydro. I'm making this presentation out of concern over the legislative changes proposed within Bill 36, the Manitoba Hydro Amendment and Public Utilities Board Amendment Act. The proposals within Bill 36 to remove Public Utilities Board oversight of electricity and gas rate setting, as well as to legislate debt-to-equity targets for Manitoba Hydro, are unnecessary moves that tamper with the affairs of a Crown corporation. This legislation will undermine independent regulatory oversight of Manitoba's largest Crown corporation, while also exposing Manitobans to rate increases beyond what would be allowed by the Public Utilities Board. The Manitoba Public Utilities Board provides independent, evidence-based, and transparent assessment of Manitoba Hydro rates. The assessment balances both the interests of consumers and the financial interests of Hydro. In public statements on Bill 36, the Premier and Finance Minister have claimed that PUB regulatory hearings cost Manitoba Hydro customers $10 million per year, a figure that is driving up Hydro rates. Just last March, Minister Friesen, while commenting on the bill, stated, quote, "It is not in our interest on an annual basis to have a hearing that costs $10 million. That's a significant cost that could go to keeping rates lower." The PUB has proven to be a highly cost-effective regulator for Manitobans. Documents from Manitoba Hydro, submitted to the PUB on July 8, 2022, show that Manitoba Hydro incurred an average annual regulatory cost of $2.91 billion for PUB proceedings over the last 8 years. Further calculations from PUB interveners show that the cost of PUB oversight, on average, to the average Manitoba Hydro electricity bill accounts for just 0.03%, and 0.7% on the average gas bill. It does not appear to be the case that PUB oversight of electricity and gas rate setting is driving up energy bills. In 2017 and 2018, Manitoba Hydro applied to the PUB for rate increases of 7.9%, citing a need to fund ongoing operations, replenish equity, and ensure debt was sustainable. In 2018, after hearing, quote, 31 days of oral evidence, including 4 Manitoba Hydro witness panels, 9 intervener retained witness panels, 5 independent expert consultant witness panels, a ratepayer panel sponsored by the Consumers Coalition, Manitoba Hydro's oral rebuttal evidence, and 3 oral presentation sessions, along with 3 public presentations, the board concluded that there was no evidence 7.9% increases were required, and instead granted Hydro 3.6% annual increases. In its final statement, the board stated it must, quote, balance the financial health of Manitoba Hydro with the interests of ratepayers. Again, in 2019, Hydro applied for a 3.5% increase, which was reduced by the PUB to 2.5%. Once again, Manitoba ratepayers were protected from excessive rate increases by the independent PUB process. Byron Williams from the Public Interest Law Centre estimates that the PUB's ruling in 2018 saved Manitobans as much as $60 million. Manitoba Hydro electricity rates are among the lowest in North America. The robust oversight provided by the PUB has repeatedly ensured that rates have been kept low while the financial health of Manitoba Hydro is preserved. By stripping the PUB of its rate-setting function and by removing much of the independent oversight in PUB rate-setting hearings, Bill 36 puts both the interests of ratepayers and Manitoba Hydro in jeopardy. By transferring rate-setting capacity to the provincial cabinet, the changes within Bill 36 open the door to political influence over rate setting rather than independent assessment. Perhaps most concerning of the legislative changes proposed in Bill 36 are the debt-to-equity mandates, which will be imposed on Manitoba Hydro. No rationale has been made in public for the debt-to-equity mandates included in the legislation. As noted by PUB interveners, these mandates are likely to require Hydro rate increases above what will be approved by the PUB. Expert testimony given at PUB hearings has repeatedly found that claims of imminent financial emergency due to Hydro's debt levels are not backed up by credible evidence. The debt load at Manitoba Hydro is not divergent from what was approved by the PUB and bond rating agencies before Bipole 3 and Kiosk were started. As costs from these 2 projects wind down in the coming years and export contracts come into full effect, it is expected that Manitoba Hydro will sustainably reduce its debt levels. Manitoba's debt-to-GDP ratio is currently below pre-pandemic levels, and there is no evidence that Hydro's debt is impacting the province's interest rates. As far as the interests of Hydro and ratepayers are concerned, there is not credible reason to expedite debt repayment. If one emerges in the future, independent, transparent, and thorough review should be used to set repayment targets, rather than legislation. Claims that Bill 36 will save ratepayers money while improving the financial health of Manitoba Hydro do not stand up to scrutiny. In fact, it appears that by reducing public oversight of Hydro rate setting, this bill exposes both ratepayers and Manitoba Hydro to worrying opportunities for political manipulation. I can see no credible justification for this bill and believe it should be withdrawn. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harney, for your presentation. We'll now move to a 5-minute question period. The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Harney. The purpose of the bill in the government's mind is actually to stabilize Manitoba Hydro and preserve the very low rates that you yourself cited as being low. They're second lowest in North America. We're proud of that advantage to all Manitobans and plan to protect it with various parts of the bill. Can you tell me, you didn't seem to express any particular fear or worry about debt. The debt's tripled at Hydro. 40 cents on every dollar goes to debt payment. How high is too high?
Mr. Harney, and I just have to recognize you. I'm not trying to cut you off, but I do need to recognize you before you can speak so that our answered operatives get everything clear. Mr. Harney.
My mistake. Thank you. This topic has been discussed extensively at PUB hearings. This was discussed in 2017 and 2018 when those 7.9% rate increases were proposed. And again, there was hours of expert testimony given by market experts on the issue of Manitoba Hydro's debt, and it was decided at those rate hearings that the debt level is currently sustainable, and there is ample evidence that the debt will be paid down sustainably over the coming decades.
Mr. Sala.
Thank you so much for your presentation. You've made so many important points here and reinforced the importance of the Public Utilities Board in helping to keep rates low. In fact, that is their role, to ensure we pay as little as possible for our utilities, and they've done an excellent job of that. I just am hoping you can comment on what you perceive as the likely impacts of Bill 36 on working families. As someone who works for a progressive policy institute that works in support and does a lot of policy work focused on the interests of working families, how do you think Bill 36 will impact low-income working families in Manitoba?
Mr. Harney.
The concern that's been raised throughout the discussion of this bill is the question of whether this will bring in higher than normal or higher than the PUB would have typically approved rate increases. The PUB has proved time and time again to have the interest of Manitoban families and working families within its purview, and has consistently approved rate increases that are lower than what Manitoba Hydro itself has called for. And so this is something that needs to be maintained going forward. Once again, this bill, by removing the influence of the PUB over rate setting, creates the opportunity for manipulation or for use of or for rate setting that doesn't necessarily balance fully the needs of ratepayers, Manitoban working families, with the needs of hydro, and that's why the PUB needs to be maintained in its current function.
Mr. Lamont.
Thank you very much. It was an excellent presentation. I agree. If you could just expand a bit on the issues of the debt cap. I know that it's being presented as being stabilizing, but I know that things like debt ceilings in the U.S. are monumentally destabilizing because they lead to the entire shutdown of the government. So if you could just talk a bit about your concerns around the debt cap.
Yeah.
Mr. Harney.
My mistake, sorry. My concern here is that these debt targets are being set preemptive of any evidence on where we're actually going to be in 15 years or in 20 years. The evidence from PUB hearings is that the debt is sustainable at its current level and that it will be paid back at a sustainable level over the coming decades. It's important to note that Manitoba Hydro was in single-digit debt-to-equity ratios from 1977 until 1995, and the ceiling did not fall in. So it's preemptive to try and create these debt ceilings without any review of where the finances are actually at. And again, if there is an issue with Manitoba Hydro's debt, this should be going through an independent tribunal process at the PUB, which I believe it would. If there was a problem with the debt and rates did need to be increased at a higher level, that should go through an independent tribunal process rather than being legislated preemptively.
Any further questions from members of the committee? Seeing none, then I want, Mr. Lamont with a follow-up.
Oh, well, just one quick follow-up, which is just about some of the, I would say, the perverse incentives around capital taxes and debt fees, that there was a PUB recommendation that because it was perceived there's political interference in 2018 or prior to 2018, that the PUB actually ordered the government to pay Hydro back, so $900 million for over the years. Is that do you see that being an acceptable way to return to balance or to help Hydro out? The government's been taking so much out.
Mr. Harney, we're almost out of time, but I will give you 30 seconds to respond.
That's an excellent question. I am just wrapping my head around this issue, and that's not something that I'm particularly familiar with at this time. Okay, thanks very much.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Harney, for your presentation and for answering the questions from the committee. We're now going to call our next presenter, Kate Kaler from the Social Planning Council of Winnipeg. Kate Kaler is apparently not here at the moment, so we will drop her to the bottom of the list and we'll call her name again later. We'll now move to the next presenter, which is Ted Scholes. Ted Scholes, private citizen, is appearing in person. Welcome to the committee, sir, and you may begin with your presentation whenever you're ready. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you. I've been looking at you over here all night. They're over there, I'll have to get them. Give me a minute. Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm a resident of Winnipeg, and I've been a Manitoba consumer for many years. I'm opposed to Bill 36, just as I was opposed to Bill 35, which was withdrawn by government after the opposition forced it to be set aside during April 2021 session of the Manitoba Legislature. Now, Minister Cameron Friesen falsely claims it was pulled by government in order to give Premier Stephenson the opportunity to set her own agenda. This assertion by Minister Friesen is absolutely untrue. Why am I and so many other Manitobans in various organizations representing consumers opposed to Bill 36? Number one, this bill, if it becomes law, will remove the PUB from its current legislated responsibility and traditional rate setting of electricity rates in Manitoba. Number two, it'll give the government of the day and future governments the sole right to determine consumer electricity rates by sitting around the cabinet table with absolutely no input from us as consumers and possibly no say by Manitoba Hydro. Number three, if the government of the day or successive governments decide to privatize the profitable parts of Manitoba Hydro, such as the generation and the transmission of electricity, they'll only have to discuss it around the cabinet table. The PUB, in its neutered state, will not be consulted, and therefore Manitoba consumers will have no knowledge of or input into this very impactful decision. And number four, and possibly and more importantly for the citizens of Manitoba, is the future of electricity. A, it's a clean, renewable energy resource. B, the marketability of electricity is growing due to the electrification of the transportation industry and the planned curtailment of fossil fuel development projects. As quoted in the September 24th Free Press article on Snow Lake Resources, where the CEO of LG stated that their South Korean company's long-term plan is to focus on North America as the fastest growing EV market. Why is the current government this is another question that I have. Why is the current government so bent on getting Bill 36 into law? Could it be a bit like the Manitoba telephone system in the early 1990s, when the CRTC assumed regulatory responsibility for all Canadian telcos, thus relieving the PUB in Manitoba of its jurisdiction? The government of that day then decided around the cabinet table to privatize MTS in January 1997. It's interesting to note that SaskTel, still a Crown Corporation, feeds approximately $75 million annually into the Saskatchewan Treasury, and while doing so, continues to provide excellent service to its customers, just as MTS did to its customers prior to 1997. If the current government neuters the PUB jurisdiction from Manitoba Hydro, this same scenario could emerge at Hydro as it did at MTS 25 years ago. But much, much worse. The privatization of the profitable parts of hydro would be a betrayal to the Manitoba citizens, and it would prove to be a colossal loss of a great resort that one day may prove to be as valuable to Manitoba as oil is currently to Alberta. It's obvious to me, as it should be to all Manitoba citizens, that the current Stephenson-led government wants to ignore any positive benefits that may come from the foresight and the actions of past government-initiated hydro development. Yes, that development created a debt, but so does most every large development project, including purchases such as your house may have cost you 25 to a 40-year mortgage. I urge the government to withdraw Bill 36 from this session of the legislature. And if the government believes the PUB is detrimental to the future rate needs of Manitoba Hydro, to offset the debt equity ratio and the risk of its capital initiatives on Manitoba consumers, then the current government should make this an election issue in 2023. Furthermore, they could immediately stop taking $500 million from Hydro's bottom line for water rentals, as noted in the Winnipeg Free Press on January 24, 22. I recognize water rental is inherent in the Manitoba Water Power Act. I also note that the Dewar government doubled the amount that could be charged. It seems the current government's okay with this policy, noting that $480 million is budgeted to be extracted from Manitoba Hydro revenue in fiscal year 21-22. We, the citizens of Manitoba, must prevent Bill 36 from becoming law.